This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-host, Ben Forstag, our managing director, and Jenna Forstrom, our community manager. This week, we're talking about why your resume is being ignored. Our show is brought to you by Land Your Dream Job Anywhere, the new book from Mac's List, available February 1st. Land Your Dream Job Anywhere shows you how to find meaningful, well-paying work wherever you live. For more information, visit maxlist.org/anywhere. What reaction does your resume create? Does the reader's eyes glaze over? Or do you engage and interest an employer so much that you get an interview for the job? Our guest expert this week is Pete Mockaitis. He says there are simple steps you can take to make your resume stand out in a stack of applications. Pete shares his tips with me later in the show. Where do you spend most of your time when you're job hunting? On a computer or talking to people? A new survey from Pew says most Americans hunt for work online. In a moment, Ben Forstag tells us more about this research and what it means for job seekers. And how do you learn the typical salary local employers pay in your field? That's the question of the week. It comes from Brett Williams in Portland, Oregon. Jenna Forstrom offers her advice in a few minutes. Let's check in first, as always, with the Mac's List team. Jenna, Ben, good to see you both again.
Hey, Mac.
All right. I think you guys are talking over each other, but that's okay. So this week, we're talking with Pete Mockaitis about resumes and why they get ignored. Tell me, when you two, I know, see a lot of resumes, and of course we've done our own as well, what have you found makes a resume stand out?
For me, it's resumes that have a really clean layout that are easy to digest, because I think most people scan a resume real fast for like 3 seconds, kind of look at the format and like where your eyes track naturally. So it's kind of like a quick scan, and then you're breaking up the information into chunks. So it's like who you are, where are you from, maybe some, if you're a younger employee or potential employee, your education, so what you've been doing, or your most recent job, and then education's next. And just getting that time for your eyes and your brain to connect. And I think if the format's a little too conjubulated, or if there's something, like a date's askew, like I like all like the dates lined up on the right side, but if one sticks out, it like kind of catches your eye and it kind of does like a wonky thing when you're processing. So for me, it's like all about form. How about you, Ben?
So a couple things. One, I think using numbers. So at the end of the day, you always want to show, not tell your accomplishments. And I think the best way to do that is numbers, because numbers quantify accomplishments and gives you like measurable goals that you've achieved. The other thing I'd say is white space. And I think sometimes people try to cram so much content into those 1 or 2 pages of their resumes that visually, like you were saying, Jenna, it's just hard to even process or even get into the resume because it's just a giant block of text. And so I think resumes that have enough open white space that it's easy to approach the content that's there, those always, I think, help the person get into the resume.
I hear you both making the same point, which is less is more. So the use of white space and having a good, clean, simple format can be powerful assets. And I can remember early in my career having my instincts told me exactly the opposite, that success depended on jamming in as much information as I could in as small a type as I could, because if only somebody would read it, I would persuade them that I was the right person for the job. But I think experience shows otherwise. You want to focus on a few simple things, those accomplishments, particularly numbers. And I know we'll talk more about this with Pete later in the show. The only thing I would add to the great list you two put out is describe your accomplishments. And again, that's a way of showing rather than telling. And numbers are a great way to document that success. Well, thank you both. And let's turn to you, Ben, because every week you're out there searching the nooks and crannies of the internet. And you're looking for websites, books, and tools our listeners can use in their job search and careers. Now, what have you found for us this week?
So this week I want to talk about a report that was recently published by the Pew Research Center. Now, Pew does a lot of research on all kinds of things, but one of their institutes is on internet science and technology. And they recently published a research study on searching for work in the digital era. This is a pretty long report, but you can get a nice executive summary from it from their website, and we'll have the URL for that in the show notes. So there's three major themes here that they talk about in this report, and all three of them are kind of intuitive. I think we could probably guess the trends that we're seeing out there, but they do a really good job of putting numbers on them. Exactly what we were talking about before, quantifying your accomplishments.
Right.
So,
give us some data.
That's right. So the first trend out there is that internet is where people spend their time in a job search. Again, that's not surprising. Just about every job seeker we talk to says the internet is their primary source for information on jobs and job hunting. But one of the interesting things here is they, again, put some numbers on it. And one of the numbers they put on that is that roughly 1/3 of Americans have looked for a new job in the last 2 years, and 79% of those people have used online resources as their primary form of research. The second trend is that people are using their cell phones and their mobile phones a lot. And this is a trend you see across all kinds of internet usage, where, people, their primary way of engaging with the internet or doing any kind of research is with their cell phones. Again, these are not shocking statistics, but we're getting some numbers on it for the first time. So, for example, 26% of all American adults have used their smartphone to browse or research job listings. I know for MaxList, when we look at our own analytics, we see about the same rate. About 25% of our audience comes to our website from their cell phone, the other 75% from a tablet or their desktop. One of the more interesting stats here is that 14% of all adults have used their smartphone to do things like fill out job applications or write cover letters or resumes, which I can't imagine writing a resume using your cell phone. But if that's the tool you have to access the internet, I guess it makes sense. The last general trend that they highlight here is that social media is becoming more and more of a resource for finding jobs. One of the stats they pull out is that 35% of social media users have utilized social media to look for jobs. And 13% of folks say that social media is the primary tool that they use to find work. So interesting data here. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this on the show is I think you need to distinguish between effort and efficacy. And what I mean is this, is that it makes sense that a lot of people are using the internet to look for a job. And this report quantifies that. But this report does not actually go into the details of how effective people are finding jobs online. So 79% of folks are using the internet as their primary search tool. It doesn't actually say whether those folks are getting any success doing that or they keep going back to the same unsuccessful strategy. I'd love to see some numbers around that. And Mac, I know we talk about this a lot, about how the internet is the first source for a lot of folks, but not necessarily the best.
Right. We hear from employers frequently, Ben, that yes, they do post jobs on job boards or share news of openings through newsletters or on their websites, but they also reach out to people that they know and trust, and that word of mouth marketing is, employers tell us, much more powerful when they're making decisions about who to interview and who to consider when they're choosing among finalists. So to your point, I think, yes, you need to be online and to look for those opportunities, but keep in mind that employers aren't limiting themselves just to online methods to find great candidates and to check those candidates.
Yeah, and I think one of the lessons we could take from this is that an increasing number of people are using that online tool, or they're going through that online path to look for work. And so you're competing against a much larger pool of people when you're applying online. Whereas if you take some of these offline strategies that we talk about on this podcast, whether it's networking, informational interviewing, finding a mentor, volunteering, it gives you an inside track because far fewer people are taking that path to work.
Right. So you probably don't want to put all your time and effort into the most popular strategies. You should use them, but the odds are much more in your favor if you do something that is unfamiliar and perhaps unknown to many job seekers, which again are the things we talk about: informational interviews, networking, and volunteering.
Absolutely. So again, this report is called Searching for Work in the Digital Era, and it's from the Pew Research Center for Internet Science and Technology, and we will have a URL to the entire report in our show notes.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. And if you have a suggestion for Ben, please write him and we may share your idea on the show. Ben's email is easy to remember. It's ben@maxlist.org. Now let's turn to you, our listeners. Jenna Forstrom, our community manager, is here, and she joins us to answer one of your questions. Jenna, what do you have for us in the MaxList mailbag this week?
This week's question comes from Brett Williams, who was at our last networking event, Career Opportunities and Change Communication, and he asks,
Hi, my name's Brett. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I'm curious as to how to find out what the average salary is for someone with 5 to 8 years of experience in the marketing industry.
So his question was about how to find salary for a marketing role. And let's talk about if a job posting doesn't have any salary at all. Let's go a little bit bigger than his question. So there are a lot of resources online for figuring out salary. There's glassdoor.com, salary.com, where you have to consider the location where you're living and then the years of experience that you either have or that the posting is asking for to figure out salary and doing that kind of stuff. So that's like the analytical data. And then the other way is to look at the website, ask around in an informational interview. If you are attending, this was at a graduate program, so kind of asking your peers what they think they're getting for the same sort of degree, talking to academic advisors, and kind of just opening up the conversation in a very casual way about like, this is what I think it's worth. Am I close? Am I totally off? But just working back with the hiring manager or maybe an academic advisor to find out what exactly that salary should be. The other thing you can do is check out on other job postings for similar roles, or if the organization maybe has posted a senior level posting with a job description and a salary range, but not so much like maybe a junior entry level position, and kind of estimate, well, if the top echelon is this, 100,000, so maybe mid-range is like 60 to 70,000, and then an entry level is like 30,000, kind of just using some best guesstimates. But how about Mac and Ben? Do you guys have any other tips?
Jenna, you took all of my tips from me. Good job.
I'm sorry.
No, I think you covered the waterfront there, Jenna. The only ideas that occur to me, one is there are often vendors in a field who, to build relationships with organizations, will do salary surveys. I think, for example, in the public relations world, where my other company, Pritchard Communications, operates, there's a firm of attorneys that does an annual survey of PR firms around the country, and they ask questions about salaries, and they do break it down by years of experience, and that information is available to the firms that participate in the survey. And I think for someone like Brett, who's looking for that information, as he reaches out to people in the field, he'll probably become aware of surveys like that. And not to sound like a broken record, but I think this is another question that you can ask in informational interviews when you're out talking to people during a search or just thinking about your career, and find out what employers are paying for people with particular amounts of years of experience.
Awesome. Thanks. And thanks, Brett, for coming to our event. We hope you had a great time.
Well, thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Brett. And if you have a question for Jenna, please email her. Her address is easy to remember as well. It's jenna@maxlist.org. Or call our listener line. That number is area code 716-562-8225. That's 716-JOB-TALK. If we use your question on the show, we'll send you a copy of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere or a MaxList coffee mug. It's your choice. These segments by Jenna and Ben are brought to you by Land Your Dream Job Anywhere, the new book from MaxList. It's coming on February 1st. For 15 years at MaxList, we've helped people in Portland, Oregon find meaningful, well-paying, and rewarding jobs that they love. Now we've put all of our best job hunting advice in one new book that can help you no matter where you live. Just like this podcast, our new book offers practical, actionable, and proven tools you can use right away. You'll learn how to get clear about your career goals, find hidden jobs that never get posted, ace your next job interview, negotiate the salary and benefits you've earned, and take charge of your career for the long run. Our new book contains advice from many of the most popular guests who have appeared on this show. Get extra insights from more than a dozen national career experts, people like Farai Chidea, Carrie Hannon, and more. Land Your Dream Job Anywhere arrives on February 1st, but don't wait. Join our pre-launch mailing list, and we'll send you the first chapter. Visit maxlist.org/anywhere. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Pete Mockaitis. Pete Mockaitis is an award-winning trainer who has served clients in over 50 countries. His work has enhanced Fortune 100 corporations, high-growth startups, and major nonprofits. He began his career at acclaimed consulting firms, the Bridgespan Group and Bain & Company. Pete is also the host of a podcast, How to Be Awesome at Your Job, and the author of the book, Team Up, Becoming Accountable to Your Dreams. He joins us today from Chicago. Pete, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Mac. It's so fun to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Now, Pete, our topic this week is resumes, and in particular, why resumes are being ignored. So I know you work with lots and lots of people, and you've been on the hiring side as yourself. What's the number one reason you see for employers ignoring resumes?
Oh, sure thing. And I would say that I'll cheat a little bit and make it an overarching reason that has 3 subpoints, if I may. And I think the main scoop is I think many folks just don't quite put the time, effort, energy, thought into it that is required. I think sometimes, or maybe oftentimes, people get word that they have an interview, an opportunity coming up, and they say, "Oh, haven't looked at my resume in about 3 years. Let's take a look." And they think a couple, tweaks, cut here, paste there, add a couple bullets, and we're done in an hour is going to get the job done. And frankly, I think that you may need to spend 10 or more hours just truly honing your story and your message to convey that you have fantastic achievements that really match up to what they're looking for.
So I can imagine our listeners thinking right now, I've heard that I should tweak my resume for every job. Are you saying, Pete, a listener might ask, that I need to spend 10 hours on my resume before I fire it off for a job?
Well, I wouldn't say, 10 hours every single time. But I mean, if you're kind of moving from a resume that is sort of, okay, ho-hum standard to, this artistic masterpiece that you're crafting, I think that will take a real chunk of time. 10 hours is a bit arbitrary, but I would kind of over-schedule it so you're good to go. And then when you customize for each job, then that may very well be a 1 hour or less operation in which you're sort of sideboarding some bullets for more appropriate bullets for the particular opportunity at hand.
So what do you see people do to the resume when they do that kind of overhaul? What kind of changes do they make, and how does that help them make their resume better?
Oh, sure thing. Well, I can think of 3 key things that come to mind here. And the first one is the biggest one, and that is making a bit of a paradigm shift away from merely your responsibilities, like I was in charge of this and this and this, toward your achievements, like you've actually made something fantastic happen. So for example, a responsibility might sound something like supervised the accounts payable department with regard to the key suppliers of raw materials to our manufacturing base. It's like, okay, that is your responsibility. That is something that you were kind of on the hook for. But what makes things sound so much more interesting would be if you accelerated the collection. Well, I guess if we're talking about accounts payable, we could say, increased the credit line on average from 23 days to 36 days. It's like, oh, that's cool. You did some things that were very helpful for that organization's cash flow situation. So that's an achievement that you can hang your hat on, that the organization has been enriched as a result of the time you spent there in that role.
And how does that make a difference, Pete, to a reader? What's going through their mind when they see that a resume that lays out those kinds of accomplishments rather than describes the responsibilities that person might have had?
Oh, sure. Well, I would say in my mind, I just think it's like, oh, this guy's a winner. This guy's a baller. This guy makes it happen. He's got the golden touch. I get kind of excited when I see just real kind of back-to-back achievements in terms, if you give me the impression, it's like, ooh, everything you touch seems to turn to gold and be fantastically successful, then that gets exciting, as opposed to when I just read the responsibilities, it just sort of tells me, yes, you had a job and you were responsible for some things. Now, you might well be able to kind of expand upon those responsibilities to show me that the scope was large and you were entrusted with much. And that's pretty good, but better still is to hear about the impact, the results, the achievement.
What are some other ways that, besides using numbers, that you recommend that people document results in resumes, Pete?
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned the numbers point. And I think that a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, Pete, I just don't know the number. I don't know how much we saved. I don't know how much more revenue we earned, et cetera. And so for that, my quick tip is I recommend that you say, if you know like the bare minimum amount of savings that you may have contributed, you can say, over $2 million. It might be $10 million. It might be $3 million. But in your heart of hearts, honestly, it's over $2 million. And so I think that makes a world of difference. You could also use the tilde, the shift and the key to the left of the one to indicate approximately. And I'd also say beyond hard number results, you can offer numbers as a bit of context. I was working with a client once, and it was cool. He said that he won the Engineering Innovation Award. It's like, okay, that's great. Okay, you won an award. It's like, can you tell me a little bit about that award? He's like, oh yes, well, we have about 20,000 engineers at the company, and they award 4 of these each year. It's like, well, tell me that. That's fantastic.
A big number. Yeah.
I was like, you're not just kind of innovative. You are super innovative. And I love to put that right in there with parentheses. It's like parenthesis, awarded to 4 out of 20,000 engineers each year. And they go, oh, now I've got some context. I can really understand that well.
Yeah, I think that kind of context can be crucial, especially if there's a difference between accomplishments at a local company, which are important and valuable, versus those same kind of accomplishments at a national or even a global scale. But if you don't paint that picture for the reader, they may not know that you're operating on a very different scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, so what I'm hearing you say, Pete, is a resume is not something you just dash off. You need to invest time in it. You also need to talk about accomplishments, not responsibilities, and then look for ways to quantify your results. What are some other tips you have that for people that will make their resume stand out in a crowded field?
Well, I would just sort of encourage that to occur sort of wherever there's the chance. I mean, if some organizations, I come from a consulting background, they actually require the submission of the grade point average and even standardized test scores, like going back to high school, perhaps like your ACT or SAT. And so I think that's maybe over the top for a number of recruiting situations. But I would say, don't be shy. If you've got it, go ahead and share those numbers. And when it comes to shyness, I think that it's often the case. Sometimes people worry that they're bragging. And I'd say you're not bragging if you're sharing a fact. You are bragging if you start using adjectives and adverbs like, excellent. Like, well, how do I know it's excellent? Like, did your manager say it was excellent? Is excellent a rating in your sort of performance management review system? So I would tweak that. But one tip I want to make sure to mention is that when you're crafting those bullets, if at all possible, it can really be helpful to share the result first and then the kind of explanation for how that result happened later. So, for example, a good bullet might sound like delivered savings of over $50 million by facilitating redesign of a Fortune 100 retailer's merchandising and planning functions. And so that there the result is first, and then I hear, oh, well, how did we get there? So by contrast, if you mentioned facilitated a redesign of a Fortune 100 retailer's merchandising and planning functions, it doesn't sort of grab the attention as much at the top of the bullet, even if right afterwards you say, client saved over $50 million. So I'd recommend, as long as the language isn't clunky, if you can lead with that, that's great, because sometimes resumes will only get maybe 5 seconds of attention unless you hook them in some way. And so if results are strong and powerful with the best stuff at the top, and even in the expression of those results within each bullet, then you're really doing yourself a favor to catch the eye and bring them in to read more.
Okay. Let's turn to some tactical questions we get from Max List readers frequently about resumes. The first one, and that we get a lot, Pete, is one page or two? And if so, whichever one you choose, why?
Well, my rule of thumb there is if you have fewer than 10 years of professional work experience, really try to get it onto one page. And if you're kind of applying for kind of an executive type role, like you've been working for 30 years, one page simply will not do. And so you'll be able to expand from there. In terms of the why, I would say in many ways, it forces you to zero in on your most powerful and most relevant experiences for the opportunity at hand. And so in a way, it has a forcing function, and that's good for you. And on the receiving end, I think the answer to why is they just may not read every word of every bullet. And so if you have fewer words and bullets for their eyes to fixate upon, then you're having a higher probability that they're fixating on something that's just fantastically relevant for them to see.
Okay, here's another question we get a lot. It's about format. Do you prefer a functional format or chronological? And again, when you tell us which one, why?
Yeah, I generally sort of expect a chronological format. And so I can really work with a functional format if one is coming my way. And I would say that the reason I like it is because the vast majority that I encounter work that way. And so it's just the way my brain is kind of primed to see them. Also, it tends to happen that your latest, greatest experiences of your highest impact and highest responsibility, hopefully, if you're on a good career trajectory, are indeed happening latest, and thus they'd be at the top. And so it follows naturally that your best stuff is right there up at the top. I would make an exception, however, for folks in the early stages of their career, like specifically maybe the first job out of undergraduate or so. You may not have a lot of work experiences to show, but if you call them out as functional skills such as communication, team building, analysis, etc., and then those bullets are able to pull experience from anything from a class to a club to a summer internship, it can be pretty powerful to make the case, yes, I'm young, I'm fresh out of school, but by golly, I do have real experience with the skills you desire.
And then we talked earlier about the value of customizing your resume for different applications. Tell us more about the benefits of that, Pete, and also describe for us the kind of steps you think people should take when they do tweak a resume for a job application.
Oh, sure thing. Well, first, I am not personally a fan of the objective So sometimes people's customization is just changing the name to
Right.
procure a job from here to procure a job from there. I think the objective isn't all that helpful. So in order to execute it, I recommend having sort of a sideboard of many great bullets across your career so that you can always just kind of reference them. And you might tag them in Evernote and then look at it that way. And I'd say the reason it's helpful is because the recruiters often have sort of a specific profile in mind. And the more you can just make it blindingly obvious that you fit that very easily and clearly without them having to think, the better.
And how do you suss out what that profile is? If you're looking at the job posting or you're in contact with a recruiter, what kind of clues should you look for, or what's the best way to research that?
Sure thing. Well, sometimes the position will just sort of spell it out pretty clearly in terms of what they're looking for. But I recommend going a little bit farther and having some real conversations with folks who are there on the inside, and to get a sense for, what do they mean by camaraderie or a collaborative work environment. And sometimes those are just buzzwords that, they didn't think much about the copy and they just sort of put that out there. And other times that means it's something very precise. It's like, no, we mean we're collaborative in the sense that we are not siloed, and you'll regularly be working with people across different functions, and you need to get comfortable with that and not say, oh, that's not my area. So that's kind of my thinking, is that you really want to talk to real people to get a sense of, hey, are these values, this vision, this mission statement, these operating principles, are they like for real part of your DNA that you feel and live every day? Or honestly, is it just a little bit more of the kind of the corporate buzzword game? And hopefully if you find some candid folks who are willing to share, you'll have a clear sense and be able to have optimized bullets.
Great. Well, tell us, Pete, what's coming up next for you?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm getting married.
Congratulations. I know we were talking about that before the interview, and it's very gracious of you to do this interview 12 days before your wedding.
So that's one thing. But I'd say what's coming up next is really, every week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, episodes of How to Be Awesome at Your Job. So I think that's been a ton of fun. Also interviewing experts who have perspective on sharpening skills that really matter to flourish at work. And so you can find that at awesomeatyourjob.com if you're interested, or the iTunes directory, or however you consume podcasts.
Terrific. Well, thank you for being on the show, and we'll be sure to include a link to your podcast, which is a great program, in the show notes. And Pete, thank you for joining us, and congratulations on your engagement and your upcoming wedding.
Oh, thanks, Mac. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, take care. All right, we're back in the Maxless studio with Jenna and Ben. Let's talk about my conversation with Pete and his points about resumes. What were key takeaways for you two?
Well, I think it was telling what he didn't suggest people do. So, I think sometimes they think that there's this pile of resumes and you have to do something that catches the eye of the person reviewing them. And so I think a lot of people go for gimmicks, right? Let's use a funny font, or let's put a photo there, or come up with a crazy design that's like super inventive, or let's put it on pink paper. And Pete didn't suggest any of those things. And I think those things, although they might work on some level, I think they actually work against you in the long run because it speaks against the professionalism you're trying to convey.
I can remember at the start of my career agonizing about the choice of color and quality of paper for both resumes and cover letters. And you want to have something nice. You want to be professional, but I think he's spot on when he says most resumes employers glance at for about 5 seconds. So it's not the quality of the paper or the color that's going to grab their attention.
Sure, and you weren't agonizing over the choice between lilac and chartreuse, right?
No, it was probably pearl and buff. I'm not sure. It was a long time ago. Well, Jenna, what were some of the key takeaways for you?
I really like that I now know that the squiggly sign to the left of the number 1 on my keyboard is called a tilde.
That was a new one for me too.
Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. And I really like that you had him weigh in on the 1-page versus 2-page resume. And I thought he had a legit response for why you could be a 2-pager. But I just love hearing people's opinions on that. And I think what he said at the beginning, the very first thing he said about spending 10 hours on your resume, well, it's doesn't need to be exactly 10 hours, but after you have decided that you're going to switch jobs or you get laid off or you're going to re-enter the workforce, spending time in cleaning up your resume and going back and saying okay, this job from 5 or 10 years ago, do I need 6 bullet points on it or can I cut it down to 2? And what are my big baller, I think is what he called them, how if you are your baller status, so how do you present that in your new resume, and just spending 10-ish hours working on that and cleaning it up so that you can present yourself in the best light was a good takeaway.
Yeah, and for the benefit of our listeners, Jenna did sort of an air pump when Pete weighed in on the 2-page resume. Yeah, so she's nodding right now. Good. Well, I agree too that when he suggested investing up to 10 hours, that's not a hard and fixed number. I think his point was you need to step back and take a hard look at your resume and see that it reflects all of your recent accomplishments, and also it's going to meet the needs of the employers that you're going to be applying for. Well, thank you both, and thank you, Pete, for joining us this week, and to you all, our listeners, for tuning in for this episode of Find Your Dream Job. If you like what you hear, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. In every issue, we give you the key points of that week's show, and we also include links to all the resources mentioned, and you get a transcript of the full episode. If you subscribe to the newsletter now, we'll send you our job seeker checklist. In one easy-to-use file, we show you all the steps you need to take to find a great job. Get your free newsletter and checklist today. Go to maxlist.org/podcast. And join us next Wednesday when our special guest will be Anna Runyon. She'll talk about the 3 biggest obstacles to your dream career and how you can overcome them. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.